You are stealing oxygen from people who actually pay taxes." The scream tore through the silence of the first-class cabin at 30,000 feet. Everyone turned to look. A middle-aged woman dripping in diamonds was standing over a young black girl in a hoodie, practically spitting in her face. She called her a stowaway. She called her filth. She demanded the pilot make an emergency landing just to kick her off. The girl didn't yell back. She just quietly texted 3 words on her phone. The woman thought she had won. She thought her wealth made her untouchable. She had no idea that the girl she was abusing wasn't just a passenger. She was the daughter of the woman who owned the plane. And when they landed, oh, the karma wasn't just coming. It was waiting on the tarmac with a fleet of lawyers. The air inside the JFK first-class lounge smelled of expensive espresso and old money. It was a scent Alice Reynolds had grown up with, though looking at her now you wouldn't know it. Alice, 22 years old and exhausted from final exams at Stanford, was curled up in a leather armchair in the corner. She wore oversized grey sweatpants, scuffed white sneakers, and a hoodie that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and large noise-cancelling headphones covered her ears. She just wanted to get to London to see her mother. Across the lounge, chaos was brewing in the form of Victoria St. Clair. Victoria was the kind of woman who didn't walk. She marched, clad in a cream-coloured Chanel suit that cost more than most people's cars. She was currently berating the lounge receptionist, a young man named David. "I specifically asked for a pre-departure mimosa with fresh squeezed orange juice," Victoria hissed, slamming her platinum credit card on the counter. "This tastes like carton juice. It's acidic. Do you want to give me an ulcer before I even board?" "I apologize, Mrs. St. Clair." David stammered, his face flushing red. "I'll have the kitchen press some fresh oranges right away." "Don't bother. The mood is ruined," she snapped, snatching her card back. She turned on her heel, her eyes scanning the room for a victim. They landed on Alice. Alice was minding her own business, scrolling through her phone, unaware that a storm was approaching. Victoria walked over to the quiet corner, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. She stopped directly in front of Alice's chair. Alice didn't look up. Victoria cleared her throat. Loudly, Alice continued scrolling. "Excuse me," Victoria barked. Alice blinked, sliding one headphone cup off her ear. She looked up, her expression mild and confused. "Yes, you're in my seat," Victoria said, pointing a manicured finger at the armchair. Alice looked around. The lounge was massive. There were at least 40 empty leather armchairs, many with better views of the tarmac. "There are plenty of seats, ma'am. I like this corner. The lighting is better for my reading." Victoria lied. She just didn't like the look of Alice. To Victoria, Alice looked like a glitch in the matrix of high society, an interloper. "And frankly, I don't think you're supposed to be in here. The staff lounge is in the basement." Alice sighed, a sound of deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "I'm a passenger, just like you." Victoria let out a short, cruel laugh. "Please, look at you. You look like you sell counterfeit DVDs in Times Square. Now move before I call security and have you dragged out for trespassing." Alice looked at the woman. She saw the insecurity masked by aggression. She saw the desperate need to feel superior. Usually Alice would just move. She hated conflict. But today she was tired. Her mother, Celine Reynolds, had taught her to be kind, but she had also taught her never to be a doormat. "I'm not moving," Alice said, softly sliding her headphone back over her ear. Victoria gasped. She stood there for a full minute, mouth agape, vibrating with rage. When she realized Alice was actually ignoring her, she stormed back to the front desk. "That thug in the corner refuses to move," Victoria shrieked at David. "I want her removed. She's disturbing the peace." David looked over at Alice, who offered him a small apologetic smile. David knew exactly who Alice was. He had been briefed that morning that the CEO's daughter was flying out. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mrs. St. Clair," David said politely. "That passenger has every right to be here." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Fine. If you won't do your job, I'll speak to someone who matters." She stormed off toward the gate, pulling out her phone to undoubtedly scream at an assistant. Alice watched her go, a sinking feeling in her stomach. She hoped they weren't sitting near each other. 30 minutes later, boarding began for Flight 802 to London. Alice waited until the last minute to board. She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who nodded respectfully. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Reynolds. We've prepared the cabin for you." "Thanks, Sarah," Alice whispered. "Please, no special treatment. I just want to sleep." "Understood." Alice walked down the jet bridge, took a deep breath, and turned left into the exclusive first-class cabin. It was intimate, with only 8 suites. She found her seat, 1A. It was the prime spot, offering maximum privacy. She began to settle in, placing her small carry-on in the overhead bin. As she turned around to sit, her heart dropped. Sitting in 1B directly across the aisle was Victoria St. Clair. Victoria was already sipping champagne, but the moment she saw Alice, she choked on her drink. "You have got to be joking," Victoria said loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. A businessman in row 2 looked up over his newspaper. Alice didn't engage. She sat down, buckling her seatbelt, immediately hoping to become invisible. "Stewardess," Victoria yelled, pressing the call button repeatedly. A flight attendant, a tall woman named Jessica, with immense patience, hurried over. "How can I help you, Mrs. St. Clair?" "There has been a mistake," Victoria said, gesturing wildly at Alice. "This girl is in 1A. That is a reserved seat for diplomats and elite members. She has obviously snuck in from economy. Check her ticket." Alice closed her eyes. "Here we go." "I can assure you everyone is seated correctly," Jessica said soothingly. "I want you to check her ticket now," Victoria demanded. "I will not sit next to someone who looks like she's about to rob me while I sleep." The air in the cabin grew heavy. The racial undertone was sharp and undeniable. Alice felt the heat rising in her cheeks, not from shame, but from anger. Silently, without saying a word, Alice pulled her boarding pass out of her hoodie pocket and held it up. 1A. First class. Victoria squinted at it, her face twisting into a scowl. "Probably forged," she muttered. "Or she used a stolen credit card." "Mrs. St. Clair," Jessica said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming firmer. "Please lower your voice. You are disturbing the other passengers." "I am the one being disturbed," Victoria hissed. "I paid $12,000 for this seat. I paid for exclusivity. I did not pay to sit next to the help." Alice turned her head slowly. She looked Victoria dead in the eyes. "I'm not the help," Alice said, her voice steady. "And if you don't stop harassing me, you're going to have a very long flight." Victoria laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. "Is that a threat? Are you threatening me? Did you hear that?" She looked around for support, but the other passengers were studiously avoiding eye contact. "It's not a threat," Alice said, putting her headphones back on. "It's a forecast." The plane began its pushback. Victoria huffed down the rest of her champagne and slammed the glass onto the tray table. "We'll see about that," she muttered. But the plane took off, and for the first hour there was silence. Alice thought foolishly that the worst was over. She reclined her seat, pulled a blanket up to her chin, and drifted into a light sleep. She woke up to the sensation of cold liquid splashing over her face. Alice gasped, sputtering, as the stinging liquid hit her eyes and ran into her mouth. It was sticky and smelled of alcohol. "Oh my God, look what you made me do." Alice wiped her eyes, her heart racing. She looked up to see Victoria standing over her, an empty champagne flute in her hand. A dark stain was spreading across Alice's grey Stanford hoodie. "What is wrong with you?" Alice coughed, wiping sweet wine from her cheek. "Me," Victoria shrieked. "We hit turbulence. Your foot was sticking out in the aisle. I tripped and spilled my vintage Dom Perignon all over myself, and unfortunately you." Alice looked down. There was not a drop of champagne on Victoria's pristine Chanel suit. It was all on Alice. "My feet were under the blanket," Alice said, her voice shaking. "You did that on purpose." "Don't be ridiculous," Victoria scoffed, signaling for the attendant. "Stewardess clean-up in aisle 1. This girl is a mess." Jessica, the flight attendant, came rushing over her face, pale. She saw Alice dripping with champagne. "Oh my goodness. Ms. Reynolds, are you okay?" "Ms. Reynolds," Victoria mocked. "Don't give her titles. She's probably a rapper's girlfriend." Jessica ignored Victoria. She grabbed a hot towel and handed it gently to Alice. "I am so sorry. Let me get you some sparkling water and a fresh shirt from our pajama set." "I don't need a shirt," Alice said, standing up. She was trembling. "I need to move seats." "I agree." Victoria clapped her hands. "Move her to the back, near the toilets. That's where she belongs." Jessica looked at Victoria, her professionalism hanging by a thread. "Mrs. St. Clair, there are no other seats in first class. The flight is full." "Then downgrade her," Victoria said dismissively. "Put her in business, or better yet, economy. I'm sure she'd be more comfortable with her own kind." The cabin went dead silent. The businessman in row 2 lowered his paper. A woman in row 3 took off her sleep mask. Alice stood up fully. She wasn't tall, only about 5'4", but in that moment she felt 10 feet tall. "My own kind," she repeated quietly. "You know what I mean," Victoria sneered, leaning in. "Loud, messy, aggressive. You've been nothing but trouble since the lounge." "I haven't said 5 words to you," Alice said. "Your presence is loud," Victoria countered. "It's offensive. I am a platinum global member with this airline. My husband is practically best friends with the vice president of operations. If I make one phone call when we land, I can have you banned from flying ever again." Alice looked at the champagne dripping from her sleeve. She thought about her mother. Celine Reynolds was the CEO of Aero Global. She wasn't just a CEO, she was the founder. She had built this airline from a single cargo plane into a global empire. Alice had spent her childhood in hangars watching mechanics fix turbines. She knew the names of the pilots. She knew the cleaning crews. This airline was her home, and this woman was treating it like her personal plantation. "You're going to call the VP of operations?" Alice asked, a strange calmness settling over her. "I will." Victoria smirked. "And I'll make sure they check your background. I bet you have a record." Alice reached into her wet pocket and pulled out her phone. It was sticky, but it worked. She unlocked it. "Go ahead," Victoria taunted. "Call your boyfriend. Call your gang." Alice opened her contacts. She scrolled past Dad, past University Security, and stopped at Mom, CEO. She didn't call, not yet. Instead, she opened her messaging app. She typed a message to the number listed as Captain Harrison Pilot. "Captain, this is Alice. Seat 1A. We have a code red situation with a passenger in 1B. She just assaulted me with a drink. I don't want to divert, but I need you to authorize the cabin crew to restrain her if she touches me again." She hit send. 3 seconds later, the chime sounded in the cabin. Ding-dong. The phone at the front of the first-class cabin rang. Jessica picked it up. She listened for a moment, her eyes widening as she looked from Alice to Victoria. "Yes, Captain." "Understood, Captain. Immediately." Jessica hung up the phone. She walked over to where Victoria was standing, looking smug. "Mrs. St. Clair," Jessica said, her voice made of steel. "The captain has instructed me to issue you a formal Section 2 warning." Victoria's jaw dropped. "A what?" "Interference with a flight crew member and assault on a passenger. If you exhibit any further aggression, verbal or physical, we will be forced to place you in restraints for the duration of the flight, and the authorities will be waiting for you in London." Victoria turned purple. "Restraints me. Do you know who I am? I am Victoria St. Clair. My husband is Richard St. Clair of St. Clair Holdings." "I don't care if your husband is the King of England," Jessica said. "Sit down. Now." Victoria looked at Jessica, then at Alice. She sat down, huffing like a child. "This is unbelievable. I am going to sue this airline into the ground. And you," she pointed a shaking finger at Alice, "you are finished. You hear me? Finished." Alice sat back down. She wiped her face with the towel. "We have 6 hours left, Victoria," Alice said calmly. "I suggest you watch a movie." Victoria seethed. She grabbed her blanket and aggressively whipped it open. As she did, her elbow knocked over the glass of water Jessica had just placed on Alice's console. Water soaked Alice's pants. "Oops," Victoria said, her face blank. Clumsy me. That was it. The subtle warfare was over. Alice unbuckled her seatbelt. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She simply stood up, walked to the front galley where Jessica was preparing meal service, and said, "I need to use the cockpit phone. I need to call my mother." Jessica hesitated. "Ms. Reynolds, we are over the Atlantic. Satellite calls are expensive and—" "Put it on my tab," Alice said. "Or better yet, put it on the company card, since I technically own the phone." Jessica blinked. She knew Alice was a VIP, but she didn't know the extent. Who is your mother?" Alice looked back at Victoria, who was watching them with a hawk-like stare. "Celine Reynolds," Alice said. Jessica gasped. The colour drained from her face. The CEO?" "Yes," Alice said. "Connect me. Now." 4,000 miles away, in a glass-walled conference room in London, the atmosphere was tense. Celine Reynolds sat at the head of a mahogany table. She was 55, elegant and terrifyingly sharp. She wore a navy power suit that cost more than Victoria St. Clair's entire wardrobe. This was the quarterly board meeting of Aero Global. Seated around her were 12 men in suits, including Marcus Miller, the Vice President of Operations, the man Victoria St. Clair was currently bragging about knowing. Celine was in the middle of dissecting the fuel cost report when her personal assistant, a young woman named Sarah, burst into the room. Sarah never interrupted board meetings. Never. "Sarah," Celine said, her voice cool but dangerous. "This better be a declaration of war." "It is Mrs. Reynolds," Sarah said, breathless. "It's Alice. She's calling from the cockpit of Flight 802. The room went silent. The board members exchanged glances. Alice never called. She was the low-maintenance child, the one who tried to hide her identity. Celine stood up immediately. "Patch her through on the speaker, now." "But Celine," Marcus Miller interjected nervously, tapping his pen. "We are in the middle of the merger vote." "Be quiet, Marcus," Celine said. Sarah pressed a button on the console. The static of a satellite connection filled the room, followed by Alice's voice. It sounded small and shaky. "Mom." Celine's face softened instantly, though her eyes remained hard as flint. "I'm here, sweetie. You're on speaker with the board. Is everything okay? Is the plane all right?" "The plane is fine," Alice said. "But I'm not. Mum, I'm in first class. There is a passenger. Seat 1B, Victoria St. Clair. Across the table, Marcus Miller stiffened. St. Clair, Richard's wife. Celine held up a hand to silence him. Go on, Alice. She's been harassing me since the lounge. She called me a thug. She tried to get me kicked off. And just now, she poured champagne on me while I was sleeping. And then she accidentally knocked a glass of water on my lap. I'm soaked, Mum. I'm shaking. A collective gasp went through the room, assaulting the CEO's daughter on the CEO's plane. It was suicide. I tried to ignore her. Alice continued, her voice cracking. But she said she's going to call the VP of operations to have me banned. She said her husband is best friends with him. Celine slowly turned her head. She looked directly at Marcus Miller. The vice president looked like he wanted to dissolve into his chair. He was sweating profusely. Marcus, Celine said, her voice dangerously calm. Do you know this woman? I know Richard, Marcus stammered. We play golf. His wife is difficult, known to be entitled. But I had no idea. She's using your name to terrorize my daughter, Celine said. Fix it. I will call the captain immediately, Marcus said, reaching for his phone with trembling hands. No, Celine said. I will handle the captain. You are going to call Richard St. Clair, and you are going to tell him that if his wife so much as breathes in Alice's direction for the rest of this flight, I will not only ban her from AeroGlobal, I will personally fund a lawsuit that will bankrupt his holding company. Do I make myself clear? Crystal. Marcus squeaked. Celine turned back to the speaker. Alice, are you safe right now? I'm in the galley with Jessica. The captain is amazing. But Victoria is still in her seat, screaming that she's going to ruin me. Let me speak to the captain, Celine commanded. There was a shuffling sound, and then a deep male voice came on the line. Captain Harrison here, Mrs. Reynolds. Captain, Celine said, I want that woman neutralized. I don't care if she's the Queen of Sheba. If she acts up again, you restrain her. Is there a federal air marshal on board? Yes, ma'am. Marshal Davis is in seat 3C. He's been monitoring the situation. Good. Activate him if necessary. And Captain, I'll be meeting the plane at Heathrow personally. Have the police ready. Understood, Mrs. Reynolds. Celine cut the line. She looked around the boardroom. The merger vote was forgotten. She was no longer just a CEO. She was a mother on the warpath. Meeting adjourned, she said, grabbing her coat. I have a plane to meet. Back on Flight 802, the atmosphere was toxic. Alice walked back to her seat. She had changed into a pair of airline-issued pajama pants because her own was soaked. She looked small, but she held her head high. As she sat down, Victoria St. Clair looked up from her phone. She was typing furiously. Oh, look who's back, Victoria sneered. Done crying to Mummy. Did you ask her to send a wire transfer so you can buy some manners? Alice didn't look at her. She put her headphones on and turned the volume to max. Victoria kicked the partition between their seats. Thud. Don't ignore me, you little brat, Victoria yelled. I just texted my husband. He's calling Marcus Miller right now. You're going to be in handcuffs when we land. Alice lifted one ear cup. You're right about the handcuffs, Victoria, but they won't be for me. Victoria laughed. She stood up, looming over the partition. You think you're tough? You're garbage. I bet you stole that ticket. I bet you, Mrs. St. Clair. The voice boomed from the front of the cabin. It wasn't Jessica this time. It was Captain Harrison. He had left the cockpit, a rare and serious move. Standing behind him was a man in a plain grey hoodie who had been sitting in row 3, the air marshal. Victoria froze. She looked at the captain's stripes. She smiled, thinking her rescue had arrived. Finally, she exclaimed, pointing at Alice. "Captain, thank God. This girl has been threatening me. She claims she knows the CEO. I want her moved to the cargo hold." Captain Harrison stepped into the first-class cabin. He was a large man, an ex-military pilot who had zero patience for foolishness. He stopped 2 feet from Victoria. "Sit down, Mrs. St. Clair," he said, his voice low and hard. "Excuse me." Victoria blinked. "I am the victim here." "You have been issued a Section 2 warning," the captain said. "You ignored it. You have assaulted a passenger with liquids. You have created a disturbance that is threatening the safety of this flight. And now you are disobeying a direct order from the captain. Sit. Down." Victoria's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "I will not. My husband is on the phone with Marcus Miller right now. He is going to fire you." The captain's face didn't twitch. "Mr. Miller is currently trying to save his own job, ma'am. He has been briefed by the CEO, and he has confirmed that you have no authority here." Victoria looked confused. "The CEO? What does the CEO care about this?" Captain Harrison gestured to Alice, who was watching quietly. "Mrs. St. Clair, the passenger you poured champagne on, is Alice Reynolds, Celine Reynolds' daughter." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. Victoria looked at Alice. She looked at the cheap hoodie. She looked at the messy bun. She looked at the scuffed sneakers. "Her," Victoria whispered. That's impossible. She looks like nobody." "She is the heiress to this airline," the captain said, "and you have just assaulted her." For a second it looked like Victoria might faint. But then her narcissism kicked in. Her brain rejected the reality. It had to be a lie. They were gaslighting her. "You're lying!" Victoria screamed, spit flying from her mouth. "She's a fraud. You're all in on it. I'm not going to let you humiliate me." She lunged. It happened fast. Victoria reached over the partition, her long acrylic nails, aiming for Alice's face. "You little liar!" she shrieked. Alice flinched back, raising her hands to protect her eyes. "Hey!" The man in the grey hoodie, Marshall Davis, moved faster than anyone expected. He vaulted over the aisle. In one smooth motion, he grabbed Victoria's wrist, twisted it behind her back, and slammed her chest first into her own seat. "Let go of me, assault!" Victoria screamed, kicking her legs wildly. One of her Chanel heels flew off and hit the ceiling. "Federal Air Marshal!" Davis shouted. "Stop fighting, or you will be tased!" "Get off me!" Victoria bit the marshal's arm. "That's it!" Davis grunted. "Captain, give me the restraints." Jessica ran forward with a packet of heavy-duty plastic zip cuffs. Alice watched in shock as the woman who had tormented her for 3 hours was physically wrestled into submission. Victoria was strong, fueled by adrenaline and entitlement, but the marshal was a professional. He pulled her arms behind her back and cinched the cuffs tight. "Zip." "You can't do this," Victoria wailed, her face pressed against the leather seat she had paid $12,000 for. "I'm rich, I'm a citizen." "You're a federal prisoner now," the captain said coldly. They didn't stop there. Because she was kicking, they used a second set of restraints on her ankles. They buckled her seatbelt. She was effectively trussed up like a turkey in seat 1B. The captain stood up and adjusted his uniform. He looked at the other passengers who were all recording on their phones. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption," he announced. "We will be landing in London in 2 hours. The authorities have been notified." He turned to Alice. His expression softened. "Ms. Reynolds, are you hurt?" Alice shook her head. She was trembling again, the adrenaline crash hitting her. "I'm okay. Thank you, Captain." "We can move you to the crew rest area if you want privacy," he offered. Alice looked at Victoria, who was sobbing into the leather, muttering about lawsuits and how she was going to have them all killed. "No, Alice said, her voice stronger now. "I'll stay here. I want to see her face when my mother walks onto the plane." The captain nodded. "Very well." He returned to the cockpit. The air marshal sat in the jump seat, facing Victoria, watching her every move. For the next 2 hours, the first-class cabin was filled with the sounds of Victoria St. Clair, crying, bargaining, and occasionally screaming threats that were muffled by the leather seat. Alice put her noise-cancelling headphones back on. She selected a playlist. She closed her eyes. But she didn't sleep. She was thinking about the landing. She was thinking about the hard karma Victoria had just ordered for herself. And she was thinking about her mother, who was currently waiting at Heathrow with a look on her face that could melt steel beams. The descent into London was turbulent, shaking the Boeing 777 as it cut through the thick grey cloud layer. For most passengers, turbulence is annoying. For Victoria St. Clair, strapped to seat 1B, like a violent criminal, it was torture. Every bump dug the plastic zip ties deeper into her wrists. Her ankles were chafing against the restraints. Her hair, usually a meticulously sprayed helmet of blonde perfection, was hanging in damp strings around her face. She had spent the last 2 hours cycling through the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, and back to anger. "My hands are numb," she screamed for the 10th time. "I have nerve damage. I'm going to sue this marshal for police brutality." Air Marshal Davis didn't even look up from his Kindle. "You bit a federal officer, ma'am. Be glad you don't have a spit hood on." Alice sat across the aisle, looking out the window. She saw the ground rushing up to meet them. The Thames was a grey ribbon below. She felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. She knew her mother was coming. Celine Reynolds didn't just pick people up from the airport. Celine Reynolds arrived like a weather event. Thump! The wheels hit the tarmac. The engines roared in reverse thrust. As the plane slowed down, the captain's voice crackled over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We have a security situation on board, and local authorities will be boarding the aircraft before anyone is allowed to deplane. Please cooperate with the instructions of the crew." A murmur went through the economy and business cabins. But in first class, everyone knew exactly who the security situation was. The plane didn't taxi to a normal gate. Instead, it turned off the main runway and headed toward a remote stand, the kind usually reserved for cargo planes or quarantined flights. Victoria looked out the window and saw them. 5 police cars, 2 black armoured vans, and a sleek black Range Rover with tinted windows. Blue lights were flashing, bouncing off the wet tarmac in a rhythmic, dizzying dance. "Is that for me?" Victoria whispered. Her bravado flickered for a second. "That's the Metropolitan Police," Marshal Davis said, standing up as the seatbelt sign turned off. "And that Range Rover, that's for Miss Reynolds." The cabin door opened, but it wasn't the smiling gate agents who entered. 4 officers from the London Metropolitan Police stormed in. They were wearing high-visibility yellow jackets and carrying tactical gear. They didn't look like they cared about Victoria's credit score. "Who is the subject?" The lead officer barked, his accent thick and authoritative. "Seat 1B, Marshal Davis said. "Victoria St. Clair, assault on a passenger, interference with flight crew, assault on a federal air marshal." The officers marched over to Victoria. "Get these things off me," Victoria demanded, trying to summon her old entitlement. "I'm an American citizen. I demand to speak to the U.S. Embassy. This man," she nodded at Davis, "kidnapped me. You are under arrest under the Aviation Security Act of 1982. The officer said, cutting her off. He pulled out a pair of metal handcuffs. "Marshal, cut the zips. We're switching her to steel." Davis pulled out a cutter and snipped the plastic. Victoria rubbed her wrists, wincing. "Finally. Now if you just listen to me, click." Click. The metal cuffs were on before she could finish her sentence. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited. "But frankly, madam, I suggest you start using it." "You can't arrest me," Victoria shrieked as they hauled her out of the seat. She looked wild, her eyes darting around the cabin. "Alice, tell them you started it." Alice stood up slowly. She picked up her backpack. She looked at Victoria with pity. "I didn't start it, Victoria, but my mother is about to finish it." The officers began to drag Victoria toward the door, but the aisle was blocked. Someone was coming up the stairs. The police officers stopped. They stepped aside, pressing themselves against the galley walls to make room. Even the British police knew when to make way for power. Celine Reynolds stepped onto the plane. The cabin temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Celine looked impeccable. She was wearing a trench coat over her suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She didn't look like she had just rushed from a board meeting. She looked like she owned the airport, which in a way she did. She walked into the first-class cabin. She didn't shout, she didn't run. She walked with the terrifying grace of a predator. Her eyes scanned the room. They landed on Alice first. Celine's expression cracked, revealing the worried mother beneath the CEO exterior. "Alice!" she breathed, rushing over. She grabbed her daughter's face, inspecting the dried champagne in her hair and the red mark on her cheek where the headphones had dug in. "Are you hurt? Did she touch you?" "I'm okay, Mum," Alice said, her voice small. "Just tired." Celine pulled Alice into a fierce hug. She held her there for a long moment, smelling the stale alcohol on her daughter's clothes. That smell hardened Celine's heart into diamond. She let go of Alice and turned slowly to face the front of the cabin. Victoria was standing there, flanked by police officers. She saw Celine. She saw the resemblance, the same eyes, the same jawline. Victoria swallowed hard. But then her delusion took the wheel again. She thought she could negotiate. This was just another businesswoman, right ape here. "Mrs. Reynolds," Victoria cried out, struggling against the officer's grip. "Thank God. A rational person. Your daughter, she's out of control. She attacked me. I was defending myself. You have to help me. My husband, Richard St. Clair, is a very powerful man. We can work this out. I can write a check." Celine stared at her. It was the kind of stare that makes people check if they are still breathing. Celine took 2 steps closer. She stopped inches from Victoria's face. "You think you can write a check?" Celine asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Victoria nodded frantically. "I'll pay for the cleaning. I'll pay for the seat. Let's just call this a misunderstanding between elites." Celine laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Mrs. St. Clair," Celine said, "you seem to be under the impression that we are in the same tax bracket. Let me correct you." Celine gestured to the plane around them. "This aircraft costs $350 million. I own it. I own the fuel in its wings. I own the logo on the tail. And most importantly, I own the army of lawyers who are currently filing a restraining order against you in 3 different countries." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You assaulted my daughter." Celine continued, her voice rising, slightly sharpening like a blade. "You treated her like garbage because of the color of her skin and the clothes on her back. You thought she was weak because she was quiet. You made the mistake of thinking your husband's money made you a god." I didn't know who she was," Victoria stammered. "If I had known—" "That is exactly the point," Celine snapped, silencing her. "You shouldn't have to know who she is to treat her with basic human dignity. The fact that you only respect people you fear is why you are pathetic." Celine pulled out her phone. She turned the screen toward Victoria. "This is a news alert from the Financial Times," Celine said. "It went live 5 minutes ago. Headline, Wife of St. Clair, Holdings CEO arrested for mid-air assault on Aero Global Heiress." Victoria gasped. "No." "Yes," Celine said. "And here is the live stock ticker for your husband's company. It's down 12%, and dropping." Victoria looked at the screen. The red line was plummeting. "Richard is going to kill me," Victoria whispered, the blood draining from her face. "Richard won't have time," Celine said, "because by the time he lands in London to bail you out, he'll be too busy dealing with the fact that Aero Global just cancelled our cargo contract with his firm. That's a $40 million loss. Because of you." Victoria's knees gave out. She slumped against the police officer who held her up by her armpits. The reality was finally hitting her. It wasn't just a fine. It wasn't just a night in jail. She had just nuked her entire life. "Get her off my plane," Celine said to the officers, dismissing Victoria as if she were a piece of lint. "Wait, please, I'm sorry," Victoria sobbed, snot running down her face. "Alice, please tell her to stop." Alice stepped out from behind her mother. She looked at Victoria, really looked at her. "You asked for oxygen, Victoria," Alice said quietly. "You said I was stealing your oxygen. Well, enjoy the air in the holding cell. I hear it's very exclusive." "Take her," the lead officer commanded. They dragged Victoria out of the cabin. Her wails echoed down the jet bridge, fading into the cold London night. Celine turned back to the crew. She looked at Captain Harrison and Jessica, the flight attendant. "Captain," Celine said, "you handled this perfectly. You have a commendation in your file, and a bonus in your next check." "Thank you, ma'am," the captain nodded. "And Jessica," Celine said to the flight attendant, who was still holding the wet towels, "you protected my daughter when I couldn't. I won't forget that. Expect a promotion to training supervisor next week." Jessica teared up. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. I just did my job." Celine put her arm around Alice's shoulders. "Come on, baby. The car is waiting. Let's go get you some real clothes and a hot meal." They walked out of the plane, down the stairs, and into the waiting Range Rover. As the door closed, shutting out the noise of the airport, Alice finally let out the breath she had been holding for 7 hours. She thought it was over, but she was wrong. Because while Victoria was in handcuffs, the video of the incident filmed by the businessman in row 2 had just hit the internet. And the world was about to react. The internet does not sleep, and it does not forgive. While Alice was finally sleeping in the guest suite of her mother's sprawling penthouse in Knightsbridge, overlooking the quiet lights of Hyde Park, the digital world was burning. The video filmed by the businessman in row 2 had been uploaded to TikTok under the username @frequentflyer88. Within 6 hours it had migrated to X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and finally the morning news cycle. It had accumulated 45 million views. The title was simple, entitled "Karen Attacks CEO's Daughter. Instant Regret." The footage was damning. It captured everything with crystal clarity. Victoria's screeching voice, calling Alice filth, the deliberate pouring of the champagne, the physical lunge over the partition, and the satisfying, bone-crunching takedown by Air Marshal Davis. But the internet didn't just watch, they investigated. By 800 AM, the hashtags Njáno Victoria St. Clair, Jock Aero Global, and Seat 1B were trending worldwide. Internet sleuths had dug up everything Victoria's address in the Hamptons, her charity gala photos where she looked down her nose at waiters, and most damaging of all, her husband's business connections. Victoria was released on bail at 9 AM. She walked out of the Heathrow police station, wearing the same stained Chanel suit, her hair a matted disaster. She expected a limousine. She expected Richard to be there with a team of fixers to make this go away. Instead, she found a single junior paralegal from her husband's firm holding a cheap umbrella. "Where is Richard?" Victoria snapped, shielding her eyes from the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras that were swarming the station exit like sharks. "Get me the phone, I need to call him." "Mr. St. Clair is not available, madam," the paralegal said, guiding her into a modest black sedan, not the Bentley she was used to. "What do you mean, not available? I am his wife." The paralegal handed her a thick manila envelope. "Mr. St. Clair asked me to give you this. He suggests you read it before you check the news." Victoria ripped the envelope open as the car sped away. Inside wasn't a love letter or a legal strategy. It was a press release. For immediate release. St. Clair Holdings announces the immediate resignation of Victoria St. Clair from all honorary board positions. Furthermore, Richard St. Clair has filed for divorce this morning in the state of New York, citing the irreconcilable damage to reputation and moral turpitude clauses of their prenuptial agreement. Victoria gasped, the paper shaking in her hands. "He can't do this. The prenup. I get $5 million for every year we were married. The moral turpitude clause voids the financial settlement in the event of public criminal conduct that damages the St. Clair brand," the paralegal said robotically. "You get nothing, Mrs. St. Clair. And he has already changed the locks on the Manhattan apartment." Victoria screamed. It was a primal sound of a woman realizing the ground beneath her had vanished. She checked her phone. Her stock portfolio app showed a sea of red. St. Clair Holdings had dropped 18% overnight. "Why?" she sobbed. "It was just a flight. It was just a girl." "That girl," the paralegal said, looking at her in the rearview mirror with barely concealed disgust, convinced her mother to cancel the Aero Global cargo contract. That contract was worth $40 million a year to your husband. You didn't just embarrass him, Victoria. You cost him an empire. For the next 3 weeks, Victoria St. Clair lived in a purgatory of her own making. She was staying in a budget hotel near the airport because her credit cards had been frozen by Richard. Her friends, the women she lunched with, the socialites she impressed, had blocked her number. When she tried to go to a coffee shop, the barista wrote Karen on her cup instead of her name. When she walked down the street, people pointed and filmed her. She was the most hated woman in Britain. Then came the trial. The case of R. V. St. Clair was heard at Isleworth Crown Court. The atmosphere inside courtroom 4 was electric. The public gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder. Reporters from the BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera were present. Alice sat in the front row. She looked strikingly different from the girl in the hoodie. She wore a tailored black blazer, her hair cascading in soft waves, her posture impeccable. Beside her sat Celine Reynolds, looking like a vengeful deity in a charcoal power suit. When Victoria entered the dock, a ripple of shock went through the room. She looked 10 years older. Her dye job had grown out, revealing grey roots. She wore a sombre grey cardigan and slacks. She looked small. The Crown prosecutor, a sharp-witted barrister named Mr. Sterling, didn't waste time. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sterling began, pacing the floor, "we often hear about air rage. We hear about stress. But what you saw on that video was not stress. It was a calculated, sustained campaign of dehumanization. Mrs. St. Clair didn't just assault a passenger. She assaulted the very idea that we are all equal." He played the video again. In the silence of the courtroom, Victoria's voice sounded even more shrill, more hateful. "You are stealing oxygen from people who actually pay taxes." Every time those words echoed in the room, Victoria flinched. The defense attorney tried his best. He argued that Victoria had mixed anti-anxiety medication with alcohol. He argued that she was under immense pressure. He pleaded for a suspended sentence. She has already lost her marriage, her home, and her reputation, the defense lawyer pleaded. Has she not suffered enough? Then it was time for the victim impact statement. Alice stood up. She walked to the witness stand. She didn't look at the notes in her hand. She looked directly at Victoria. "My name is Alice Reynolds," she began, her voice steady and clear. For 3 hours, this woman made me feel like I didn't exist. She judged me by my hoodie. She judged me by my skin color. She poured alcohol on me while I slept. But the worst part wasn't the physical assault. Alice paused, scanning the faces of the jury. The worst part was that she truly believed she was right. She believed that her bank account gave her the right to treat another human being like garbage. She told me she would call the vice president of my mother's company to have me banned. She weaponized her privilege to try and destroy a stranger's life. If I had been anyone else, if I hadn't been the owner's daughter, she might have succeeded. And that is why I am standing here. Not for me, but for every person who doesn't have a CEO, mother, to save them. The courtroom was dead silent. Celine Reynolds wiped a single tear from her eye. Justice Hargo, the presiding judge, was a woman known for her severity. She shuffled her papers and looked down at Victoria over the rim of her spectacles. "Victoria St. Clair, please stand," the judge commanded. Victoria stood, her legs trembling so hard she had to grip the railing of the dock. "You have pleaded guilty to 1 count of common assault and 1 count of endangering the safety of an aircraft," Justice Hargot said. "Your counsel asks for leniency. He speaks of your fall from grace. But I see no remorse in you, Mrs. St. Clair. I only see self-pity." The judge leaned forward. "Air travel relies on a social contract. We agree to behave civilly in a confined space. You tore that contract to shreds. You bit a federal air marshal. You terrorized a young woman. You acted as if the laws of common decency did not apply to you." "Please," Victoria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do community service. I'll clean streets." The sentence of this court, Justice Hargot continued, ignoring the interruption, "is that you be imprisoned for a period of 18 months. Victoria let out a strangled cry. "Prison. No, I can't go to prison." "Furthermore," the judge raised her voice, "due to the severity of the threat you pose to flight safety, I am exercising my power under the Aviation Security Act. You are hereby placed on the international no-fly list." The gallery gasped. "This means," the judge clarified, twisting the knife, "that you are banned from boarding any commercial or private aircraft, entering, leaving, or operating within the United Kingdom, the United States, and the European Union for a period of 10 years. Victoria collapsed onto the bench behind her. The travel ban was the final nail. For a woman whose identity was built on jet-setting luxury vacations and escaping consequences, this was a cage. She was trapped. She would never see Paris, Milan, or her vacation home in St. Bart's again. She was grounded, permanently. "Take her down," the judge ordered. 2 bailiffs moved in. They didn't handle her gently. They grabbed her by the arms. "Alice!" Victoria screamed as she was dragged toward the secure stairwell leading to the cells. "Alice, please, call your mother. Call Richard. Someone help me." Alice didn't look away this time. She watched. She watched until the heavy door slammed shut, cutting off Victoria's wails. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and cold. The paparazzi were frenzied, shouting questions, but Celine raised a hand and silence fell. "Mrs. Reynolds, are you satisfied with the verdict?" a reporter from the Times shouted. Celine stepped up to the microphone. "Justice was served today. But let this be a reminder. My airline connects the world. We bridge cultures and continents. If you bring hate onto my planes, you will find that the exit door is very, very far away from where you want to be. She guided Alice into the back of the waiting Range Rover. The door closed, shutting out the noise of the flashbulbs. As the car pulled into London traffic, Alice felt a vibration in her pocket. It was a text message. She pulled out her phone. It was from Captain Harrison, the pilot of Flight 802. Captain Harrison. Just saw the news. 18 months and a 10-year ban. The crew is celebrating in the break room. Thank you for standing your ground, Alice. You made the skies a little friendlier today. Alice smiled. She typed a reply. Alice, thanks, Captain, but you and Jessica were the real heroes. P.S. Mom is giving Jessica that promotion, right? Captain Harrison, already done. She's the new head of cabin crew training. Safe travels, Miss Reynolds. Alice put the phone down and looked at her mother. Celine was busy on her tablet, reviewing stock numbers. Aero Global's shares had actually gone up since the verdict. The market loved a CEO who protected her own. You okay? Celine asked, not looking up, but reaching out to squeeze Alice's hand. Yeah, Alice said, looking at her reflection in the darkened window. She saw the girl who used to hide in hoodies. That girl was gone. I'm better than okay. Good, Celine said, because we have a flight to New York tomorrow. I assume you want first class. Alice laughed. Actually, Mum put me in economy. I want to meet some real people. Celine smiled, a genuine, proud smile. That's my girl. The car sped off toward the horizon, leaving the courthouse and Victoria St. Clair far behind in the rearview mirror. The Karma hadn't just hit, it had landed parked and turned off the engine. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the spectacular crash and burn of Victoria St. Clair. She started the flight, thinking she was the queen of the sky, and she ended it in a prison cell, divorced, broke, and banned from flying for a decade. It's the ultimate reminder that character is how you treat people who can do nothing for you. Victoria failed that test and she paid the ultimate price. I think Justice Hargott's sentencing was absolute perfection, especially that 10-year flight ban. Imagine being a socialite who can never leave the country again. Now I want to hear your verdict. Do you think 18 months in prison was enough? Or did she deserve even more time for assaulting a federal air marshal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story gave you that sweet sense of justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you're the first to hear our next story of drama, karma, and revenge. Thanks for watching. Stay kind, stay humble, and I'll catch you in the next video.